Hello again. Continuing the Israel series here, we're going to be looking at Zechariah chapters 12 through 14 that all kind of deal with the day of the Lord, some events in the millennium during the 1,000-year reign of Christ that once again prove a future physical nation of Israel will exist. And since I'm going to rereading the entire chapters, I'm going to break this down into 3 separate videos to make it more consumable for the viewer, so you won't be watching like a 45-minute video or an hour or something. Just try to break them down into smaller chunks. So the burden of this vision given to Zechariah begins here in chapter 12, and it carries through to the end of chapter 14. Now, Zechariah 12 is basically summarizing the events leading up to the Battle of Armageddon. And I'll just read the chapter and kind of make comments as we go down through. But I will tell you that the way that the covenant people, replacement people, whatever you want to call them, they generally try to get around this chapter is by saying that this was what was, in quotes, supposed to happen if Israel had accepted Jesus as Messiah. Now, there may be different takes on it, different nuances, and different, groups, dispensational or covenant or whatever, what have you. There's, different nuances on understandings of the passages in question. But generally, this is, how you would get around, so to speak, the literal reading, because you can't read it literally and think that God's doesn't have a plan for Israel in the future. So they'll say this is an old covenant plan, but there's nothing within the passage that says it is a contingent prophecy. They'll use this for other prophecies also, because they just can't get around them otherwise. Either that or they'll spiritualize it. So if it's something that will still happen in the future, then we can be certain that the church is not Israel due to the physical and geographical nature of the events, which would be just ridiculous to apply to a spiritual body of Christ. Now, these things may have happened at Jesus' first coming if Israel had accepted him. However, the fact that they did not does not disannul the statements the Lord makes here. They just got postponed into a future time. And this is generally why, through years of reading scriptures, that I've adopted what people will term a dispensational view of the scriptures. When you read the Bible this way, you accept what's plainly being said, and you don't turn literal statements into allegories or only accept prophecies when it fits the narrative, for example. And that's what you do when you read the Bible from a covenant perspective. Israel means Israel historically, but Israel means the church in the future, except when it sounds ridiculous, then it's hypothetical for Old Testament Israel. If you're reading, talks about Israel in, Paul's epistles or whatever, if it speaks in a negative light, well, that's old Israel after the flesh, they'll say. If it speaks of Israel in a positive light, well, that's Israel meaning the church. And you just play these word games where it means what you want it to mean when it fits your narrative. You don't have a consistent reading of, the term throughout the Bible. But you don't have to play this game when you read the Bible from a dispensational standpoint. So let's read it. I'll make some comments down through. The burden of the word of the Lord for Israel, saith the Lord, which stretcheth forth the heavens, and layeth the foundation of the earth, and formeth the spirit of man within him. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day, this day he's talking about where God makes Jerusalem a cup of trembling. See, God turns the hearts of these nations against Israel, and all that burden them, let's see, and in that day I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. So it doesn't matter how many people they've got coming against it, God is going to deliver it. It says, in that day, in verse 4, saith the Lord, I will smite every horse with astonishment, and his rider with madness, and I will open mine eyes upon the house of Judah, and will smite every horse of the people with blindness. So God's going to intervene supernaturally here when these nations and peoples come against Jerusalem. And the governors of Judah shall say in their heart, the inhabitants of Jerusalem shall be my strength, in the Lord of hosts their God. In that day will I make the governors of Judah like an hearth of fire among the wood, and like a torch of fire in the sheaf. And they shall devour all the people round about, and on the right hand and on the left. And Jerusalem shall be inhabited again in her own place, even in Jerusalem. So I take that to mean that God is going to do these people who are being, who nations are coming against it, that inhabit Jerusalem, with just a valiant spirit to fight. It says they're going to be like a hearth of fire among the wood, like the wood being the people coming against Jerusalem. And the Lord also shall save the tents of Judah first, that the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem do not magnify themselves against Judah. And honestly, I don't understand exactly what that means. There must be something relative to the people that belong to the house of Judah versus the people that are in Jerusalem. Must be a difference there in residents of those areas. You know, originally, Jerusalem was within the territory of Benjamin when they divided the land, and then when the kingdom split, then Benjamin and Judah kind of joined together, and Jerusalem became the capital of the kingdom of Judah. So I'm not sure in the future if there's some delineation there between who's living in the kingdom of Judah, or not the kingdom, but a territory assigned to whoever aligns themselves with Judah, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. All right, in verse 8, in that day shall the Lord defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and he that is feeble among them at that day shall be as David, talking about what a warrior David was. And so even the most feeble person will be a fighter like David. And the house of David shall be as God, as the angel of the Lord before them. So they're going to be really, I don't want to say invincible, because I don't know if people will die, but what's the word I'm looking for? They'll just be unstoppable from a fighting standpoint when they turn and fight, and God is also intervening in supernatural ways against these peoples coming against Jerusalem. In verse 9, and it shall come to pass in that day that I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem, and I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplications, and they shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one mourneth for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him as one that is in bitterness for his firstborn. All right, here in verse 10, the covenant people will say that the grace and supplication was poured out on the cross, and they'll reference John 19:37, quoting Zechariah 12:10 here. And they'll say when he comes in Revelation 1, he's coming to destroy, and his eyes are like a flame of fire. And, while these points are true, he's not coming to destroy everyone. He's coming to destroy those nations coming against Jerusalem. And he'll still pour out his grace to believers who are alive at that time. And so in part, we can make a dual application of verse 10. However, notice that in John 19, John stops at the word pierced when he quotes this verse, Zechariah 12:10, and doesn't say that they will mourn, because obviously they were not, the people, Israel was not mourning at that time. They were mocking Jesus. But in Revelation 1, their wailing, which is basically the mourning you see in Matthew 24:30. So the complete fulfillment of Zechariah 12:10 happens at his second coming. And the mourning could be happening for different reasons. It says in verse 10 that they are mourning, like mourning for an only son, someone that they love. And we could make another application to the wailing in Revelation 1:7 to be people who are, mourning in fear. So, let's see, where are we here? All right. And in that day there should be a great mourning in Jerusalem, as the mourning of Hadadrimmon in the valley of Megiddon. And what that's referring to is when this is saying the mourning shall be like that mourning. So what was going on in there is that is when Josiah was killed, and there was a great mourning for him throughout Israel. So they mourned for him, out of sadness for him dying, and so that will be the same way that they're mourning here when they see the Lord. For sadness, understanding that they had killed him, or at least their, as a people in the past, they had killed him. It says, "In the land shall mourn every family apart, the family of the house of David apart, and their wives apart, the family of the house of Nathan apart, and their wives apart, the family of the house of Levi apart, and their wives apart, the family of Shimei apart, and their wives apart. All the families that remain, every family apart, and their wives apart." And I don't know what why it's specifically calling out those houses. David, Nathan, and Nathan could be a house of different, there's different Nathans in the Bible. But it's interesting that it says that they're wives. So you understand that these are people in their flesh and blood that, what do I want to say? That, genetically, but that's not the right word. That, are physical descendants of these houses, Levi, David, Nathan, and their wives. And so you know that these are people in their flesh and blood, physical descendants is what I meant to say, of these houses, because people who are, even if these were, I don't know if some people hold this position, but even if these were people, Jews in their, they want to say these are Jews in their resurrected bodies or whatever. Well, that couldn't be the case because there's no marriage in the resurrection. No one's going to have wives. So these have to be physical Jewish people in flesh and blood that are doing this mourning. But again, so that's basically how I see that passage. I think that's really the only way you can literally interpret it. Otherwise, you got to make stuff up like, oh, this would have happened, but now, because once you come up with a theological position, and then you try to craft, you run up against literal verses, literal passages that contradict it. Now you have to craft a narrative around and explain away the literal reading of the verses. They're either not literal, or it's so literal you can't spiritualize it, so you have to make it like a contingent thing, like this would have happened, but because God's wrote down what would have happened, but now it won't happen. But that's just not the case. As we'll see, there's nothing, that's just a fabrication that they have to make up, because there's nothing in here that reads this, where this would read as something that's contingent. So that's it. That's Zechariah 12 and 13, 14 coming shortly.